Good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone from all over the world. Welcome to Day 8, Lecture 1 from Climate Change AI Virtual Summer School. And this topic first is about ethics of AI. And the speaker will be Dr. Angella Ndaka. And now I think here is a brief introduce of herself. She has very impressive background. She has a PhD in sociology and gender study from one of the university in New Zealand. And also her focus is on sustainable artificial intelligence technique future, special interest in exploring social ontology, shaping AI and emerging techniques. And her focus also integrate African philosophies and epistemology in the AI and ethics of AI debates. And beyond her PhD degree, she also holds qualification in Master of Public Policy and from Australian National University, and also intercultural, interreligious study from Africa International University, and education from another like Kenyan University. Currently, she's an earlier career researcher in critical socio-technical study on AI and a consultant on gender and digitizing with FAO. And she's also the executive director and co-founder for the Center of African Epistemic Justice. It's an abbreviation called CAEJ, where she is also an AI ethics and governance research lead. Her research at the CIEJ seek to promote methodologies that are informed by African tech priorities and values, and complemented by global responsible research and innovation best practice. And now let's welcome her on the stage. Dr. Angella Ndaka. And
thank you so much, everyone, for this invitation, and thank you for CCAI for inviting me. Allow me not to put my video on because of the limited network. I hope everyone can hear me, right? I'm assuming, Ellen, you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. Yeah, so should I share my slides, or you have shared my slides for me? You can share my slides for me, please.
Share your slide. Wait a minute.
If I am able to share, I can do that. Should be able to share. Let me try and share them.
Okay. I can see now.
Able to see?
Yes.
Are you able to see that?
Yes,
okay.
I can see it.
Yeah, so sorry for the delay. I think we experienced a technical glitch, which is part of what we are doing now in technology, but I'm grateful for this invitation to be able to speak about AI and climate change, and particularly the ethical issues around the narratives and the debates around climate change. So I would...
Dr. Ndaka, can I pause you a little minute? Some people from the chat say like the voice is not clear. So can you speak louder and maybe close to your mic?
Yes, let me try and speak close to my mic. Can you hear me? Am I louder now?
So participant, can you type here in the chat and see if you can hear again? Words unclear, so maybe you can close the mic and maybe increase the volume from the mic.
Okay, that's what I'm looking for.
Everyone just give speaker a second, trying to make this better.
Okay. So I'm trying to... Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. So
Am I loud enough? I'll try
Uh,
to check the intensity of the speaker, and it sounds good to me so far.
Perfect now. Yeah.
Perfect. From
Thank
the
you.
participants?
Yeah.
You're good? Everyone? Okay. Yeah.
Everyone's
So,
okay now. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm going to, in this particular lecture, to try and have a critical discussion around AI and the debates around climate change. And in as much as I will not provide that those solid solutions of how we want to look at ethics of AI around climate, around environmental sustainability, and around the discussion of sustainable AI broadly, I believe that we can be able to pick a few points here and there and start rethinking, because my agenda of this particular lecture was actually to put us in a position where we can start thinking in terms of how is AI being framed now in relation to climate change. Who is dominating this particular discussion? How are they shaping the discussion? And what is at stake when it comes to the future of the planet that we are living in? Because already we can see that we are experiencing a lot of challenges with the issues of climate crisis and all that. So as we continue keeping talking, we'll continue interacting with one another and get to know exactly where is this discussion going. Because again, before the debate of AI became dominant, we had a dominant debate about climate change that was ongoing. And this one is another layer of a big discussion, a big global discussion that is in play. But again, also they are entangled with each other, because as you are going to discover as we continue talking, that AI, and I'm sure many of the speakers that have come to this climate change AI is contributing positively in terms of addressing issues of climate change. But then again, it's also inducing new impacts into climate that are going to have negative social material consequences to populations in different spaces. So this lecture, basically the outline is, as you can see, learning outcomes, introduction, and all that. So I don't have to talk about that outline. But the learning outcomes, what I would expect most of participants to be able to get out of this particular discussion is that you should be able to understand the different framings of the AI in climate crisis, so that we are not just focusing on one dominant framing and missing.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I still see people say that the voice is not clear right now. So can you help to adjust the volume or speak closer? I don't know. And also, please use the presenter mode.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. So I'll try and increase my volume, because I think I have tried everything else that is possible concerning increasing the volume and staying closer.
Now it's
closer
better.
to the mic as much as possible. Yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah. It's
so at the end of this lecture, I'm imagining that we should be able to think about the different framings of AI and how it relates to climate change. And we should be able to identify what exactly is that dominant framing, and what is that dominant framing which is shaping the conversation around climate change. And if you are a climate change enthusiast, you should be able to see how the power is playing around. So the second outcome should be, you should be able to see the power dynamics that are shaping AI and that are shaping the AI and climate, or AI for climate discourse. So that from here, we can see how we can engage AI as climate enthusiasts, but more importantly, as designers or people who are deploying AI in different spaces. And then the last outcome is we should be able now to start thinking about the ethical perspectives of AI in relation to climate change, but more importantly, focusing on the situatedness of the different impacts that it's going to have on different kinds of people or different kinds of populations in the globe, because all of us are experiencing this climate differently. We're also experiencing the AI differently. Yeah. So just to give an introduction, is AI has really created profound impacts, and as we can see from the world that we are living in, what we have heard from many people, what we are reading from the books, what we are reading from the internet, and what we are actually experiencing as a people, we can notice that AI has unprecedented impact on the society. And these ones are going to be multiple, they're going to be layered, and they are also going to be positive and negative. So they have very nice benefits and very enormous changes that are going to happen to the world positively. But then again, also there are also risks that come with it. And I'm sure most of the speakers that came ahead of me have talked a lot about such benefits. They have exposed so many benefits that are happening in different sectors. But then AI has both positive and negative things. So it comes with both positive good things, and it will also come with bad things. There are risks that are involved. There are some that we know now, but there are others that we do not know up to now. So those are what we call anticipated impacts. So what we are anticipating, what we are imagining, or what we foresee. Sometimes some of those things are being discovered as these particular technologies are being designed. And those who are designing AI know I can see that and can talk about it. But then there are concerns that are revolving around issues of ethics up to now that are not yet addressed. Issues that are around equity and inclusivity and social justice, including epistemic justice, because epistemic justice also touches on issues of climate. And these ones are both noticeable in spaces where AI is conceived. Actually, I've just talked about AI design and deployment, but also where AI is being conceived, the investment. Who is investing in AI? How are they thinking about these things? Equity, inclusivity, and justice. And where the designs are happening. How is AI being designed? Who is being involved? Who is being excluded? And how are issues of equity being addressed and all that? And who is dominating that conversation again? So, and also deployment. How is AI being deployed in different spaces from the health sectors, education sectors, agriculture sector, to even talking about the social digital spaces like Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, and also in spaces where decision making is involved, including employment, decision making in government level, and all these particular spaces. So there are issues around that. But now, in relation to the today's lecture, there are issues of equity and ethics and justice in relation to climate change because of some things that I will highlight as we go in this particular lecture. Now, when it comes to the environment, we have critical issues that have been raised concerning electricity consumption, which has a direct impact on the greenhouse gas emissions and all that. And if you have studied closely, you will notice that most of the companies that were previously claiming to be able to manage their greenhouse gas emissions, actually in the introduction or in the inception of generative AI, like Google and Microsoft, they are actually experiencing what we call an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. They are unable to meet whatever they used to claim to be their targets earlier. And more importantly, there is a lot of lack of accountability into what emissions they are doing, what are other ethical issues that relate to climate that are involved, including issues that are touching water. There is a very big problem with lack of accountability in terms of how much data centers are consuming in terms of water. Regardless of that, despite that, there's a lot of research that is showing how much is being emitted, how much water is being consumed, and this is touching directly to issues of climate change and all those issues. Now, what I'm noticing and what I'm introducing in this particular discussion is that there is a very dominant narrative of techno-fix that is going around, and we all seem to be caught up in the same, including those who are designing AI here. When you hear someone mention any problem of climate, of any problem, even the social problems, there is a whole debate and a whole agenda where people are trapped in a techno-fix agenda or ideology, or even techno-solutionism. So we are all thinking and we are all debating and focusing on what can AI do to solve the problem, even the problems that we as the human beings are the ones that are creating. Problems that we know that the fixes around those particular problems can only be dominantly found in the social address of our own social issues and our own social problems that we are experiencing. So there's a big approach, even how the funding is being done. It is taking a techno-fix, techno-solutionism approach. And this narrative should be scrutinized because, again, as we continue talking, you'll discover that some of these narratives are only pushing for what we call unlimited growth of technology and placing technology as a band-aid to the existing problem, and also reintroducing new problems of climate crisis and all that, without necessarily solving them. Those problems of climate crisis that we have been experiencing pre-AI times. So these ideological perspectives, they are very much related to unbalanced power dynamics, unequal power dynamics between the tech investors, the tech conceivers, and those who design, as well as those who deploy the technology. And these ones, we're seeing that in as much as AI can actually solve problems, if it is addressed and specifically deployed in people and design, we can see that it can also, and it has a very high potential of exacerbating inequality and excluding communities, especially the ones that live in the margins, the global majority, and people who are living in vulnerable spaces. So this presentation will delve into talking about those ethics. How should we think about ethics when we are talking about climate change? How do we start thinking about power? Because it's very easy to say that I am going to pick technology and fix this particular problem. But then there is a lot in the invisibility about the power that lies in the hands of different people in terms of shaping that particular narrative. And then we also think about how AI is trained, and also what are the ethical considerations should we start thinking. So I don't want to go very much into climate change concepts, but at least I can talk about mitigation, adaptation, and limiting injustice. Mitigation, most of you know, it focuses on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but not just that, but also we can start talking about other issues of water, because they are also tied to the global warming. We can also start talking about other issues like waste, other issues that are tied into e-waste, and actually the social issues that are around all these particular, because again, when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions, the more the globe gets warmer, the more the populations get vulnerable. The more the population get vulnerable, the more the populations are going to behave in a desperate way, and there is always this rebound effect in terms of how are we getting this conversation on to ensure that populations are not struggling or they're not trying to balance between different issues of social justice and their livelihood at the same time trying to balance the climate change on how they can be able to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So this is where we go to adaptation. How are we talking about strategies that for human beings are able to cope with the climate impact? But then again, how does AI come in? Because I'm sure many people are talking about using AI for predictive modeling, optimizing resource management, and all that. So can we also introduce another discussion where we are talking about human beings being able to retain some of their adaptive strategies, which do not necessarily need AI? Because like a research that I read a while ago that in some country, Bangladesh, and then the study was also done in the US, that farmers are showing to be losing their adaptation skills and adaptation practices in the introduction of artificial intelligence and other technologies that are addressing it. So much so, like you can see that the former adaptation practices are getting lost while we are using technology to cover all problems, not forgetting that there are actually adaptation practices that are important in particular discussion. Then also, some of the concepts that will be emerging here will be climate equity and justice. How do we ensure that there is fairness and some communities are not exposed more than others in that particular climate action? How do we talk about AI in a way that it is not solving some climate crisis for some populations, while it is reducing climate crisis for other populations? And this is where we start talking about equity, justice, talking about policy in a way that when the global decisions are being made and when the local decisions are being made, they are not going to worsen some lives while they are going to make some other lives better. Yeah. So I know the discussion has been going on in this particular lecture, but I can just inject a few things, and I know they've been discussed in different lectures, but I will just highlight where some of the sectors which are going to be changed by AI, is particularly the ones that relate to climate change directly. I think you know that agriculture and climate change are like Siamese twins, because the agricultural sector requires good climate or good environment for it to thrive. But then again, also the agricultural sector has the ability to mess with the climate depending on how resource management is done, how the agriculture itself is done, how chemicals are being used in these particular spaces. Some of the agricultural, like the livestock, some of the largest greenhouse gas emitters and all that. And so there will be definitely good positive changes that will happen in agriculture. Like AI will increase agricultural efficiency, it will increase production, it will increase resource management. I think part of what you know is that AI is supporting very great initiatives that are dealing with reduction of leaching, management of water resources to ensure that they are not being polluted. Precision agriculture is ensuring that nutrients are just being given to plants that are enough not to be able to leach to the soil or to go to the rivers or to be washed to the rivers. Also through improved farm level decision making, farmers are able to produce more and they are able to think more about environmental sustainability through their own self-led initiatives. And basically, in agriculture, AI is likely to increase improved food production and all that. But then, on the other hand, in agriculture, AI may have adverse ethical and data privacy issues, particularly one of the issues that I'm concerned now and I'm focusing on in my research is a data value concern, because there is a lot of private companies that are holding farmers' data, whose value can only be harnessed by those particular companies. But other issues that may emerge is like job losses, environmental impacts. Now that's a rebound one, where now AI, if it's really impacting in terms of introducing higher greenhouse gas emission, this goes back again to agriculture. And agriculture is one of the sectors that is likely to be impacted by the global warming that is likely to emerge. Now, environment directly is going to be impacted positively by the use of AI. Like we have monitoring, AI can be able to enable monitoring weather patterns, monitoring adverse weather events, can monitor deep sea activities, like the rising sea levels. It is also, we're also talking about other technologies that can be able actually to manage the rising sea level. It's something that we are discussing with glaciologists, but it hasn't really been taken up. AI is going to be very pivotal in terms of shaping that. AI can be able to monitor air quality. It can be used to even in the forest and natural resources. Yeah, that one we are going to talk about. The resources. It can be able to monitor, like here in Kenya, where I am now. We are using AI to monitor poaching, animal poaching, and all that. So there is a very big impact in terms of protection of endangered species, both in seas, on land, and in many other species. But then the negative impact, we have the increased greenhouse gas emission that is actually getting out of hand now, and the only visibility that we can see is that some of the companies are coming out and saying that our greenhouse gas emission is increasing. Like the other day, I read a report about Microsoft and also Google being unable to achieve the targets that they had about reduction of their greenhouse gas emission. Actually saying that it has been shooting every other day because of generative AI. But that is only one part of it. There is exploitation of rare metals, of which no one is talking about. Here in Africa, we are insisting on metals like lithium and cobalt and nickel to be listed among what we call blood minerals, because they are introducing new conflict in places where there are such deposits, and there is a lot of exploitation of that. There is a lot of exploitation of child labor in those particular spaces. And there is a lot of exploitation of lands and the landscapes. When we are talking about mining, we are talking about the landscapes being exploited. There is no rebuilding of those landscapes and all that. But also the benefit of all those particular minerals is being taken by those who have the power and the money to do so. So we're having in some countries a reintroduction of labor slavery, but more important, mineral extraction and those extractive acts that were being done during the colonial time. So that communities that own those lands, everything underneath their lands is extracted and it's taken away, but they're still left in poverty. And more importantly, there's another part of air that's negative to the climate, to the environment, that is production and disposal of e-waste through air hardware. As we continue talking about AI, we are talking about computing. And as we continue talking about computing, then we will need hardware. And the more we talk about hardware, the more we need, the more will be spent and the more will be disposed. But currently, as of 2020, we were still talking about 84% of undocumented e-waste going particularly to the global south countries, countries which do not even have proper management systems for e-waste. And these are likely to not only cause impact to soils, they're also going to emit some gases in the atmosphere and impact the health of such populations. So e-waste in itself is actually an environmental menace in the developing countries, and particularly coming from the global west or from the global north. Now, another part of the negative aspect of the environment is the copious spending of water. So far, we are talking about one data center, a large data center, or an average data center actually in America spends water that can be consumed in a month in a suburb somewhere, or even in America. But then that water is spent in a day to cool data centers. Already there are reports that I was reading the other day that in Spain, they are experiencing dry spells because of data centers that have been elevated there. And the water accountability issue is a problem because no one is talking about water and no one is talking about how water is being spent, the inequality in terms of water. In fact, someone was highlighting, some reports was highlighting that water is going to be listed among the most expensive item it will be listed among the expensive items when we are talking about the items that can be bought in terms of shares. So, and this is a public good. I mean, we've been talking about water being a public good, a public common, a common good, and something that is needed by everyone is a basic need and all that. But in the future, it may be something that people are going to be buying, and those who can afford it are the ones who will be able to have it. So other aspects that we may talk about are energy and water resources. At least we talked about environment, talking about the energy efficiency positively. AI can be able to improve energy efficiency. Actually, it can be able to improve leak detection of water purification systems and all that. And some times ago, Google talked about using AI to be able to manage their greenhouse gas emission. And I don't know what is happening because they were saying that it can be able to reduce up to 40% of their greenhouse gas emission. Now, I don't know what has been happening because there seems to be now a quiet silence of because of lack of accountability, because there seems to be in the era of generative AI that there is a new induction of new problems and all that. So other problems are high consumption, which I've already talked about. Now, other what we call external impacts that relate but tied to climate change are social economic impacts, like what we talk about economic polarization, induction of social inequalities in some populations. And I know I'm talking like that as an African because I know there is a lot that is happening. Whatever the hype is out there, we can also see there are a lot of visible socio-economic polarization that impact AI. I mean, that impact climate change directly because when people start losing jobs and people are being exploited, when people tend to change their adaptive and their behavioral towards the climate, and in a way, it's indirectly or directly touching all those ones. Yeah. So, climate change and AI. If we start talking about climate change in itself, we know the immense impact that it will have. If we start thinking about climate change, already it is happening in many places. We have talked about tsunami, we have talked about hurricanes, we have talked about rising sea level, floods in different spaces, earthquakes and all that. But how do they impact people? There are loss of lives, loss of livelihoods, economic losses, environmental degradation. and general destruction of human and non-human resources and infrastructure. But then again, this kind of impacts also depend on what we call vulnerability. The more vulnerable the populations, the more the destruction. Because again, there are populations that will be able to pick up faster than others. There are others that once the climate, once the issues or the disasters that are associated with climate change hit, those populations never recover. In 2018, 315 cases of natural disasters were reported globally, affecting approximately 68.5 million people and causing losses amounting to around $131.7 billion. Infrastructure, health, food, human habitat, and ecosystem remain vulnerable to climate change impacts up to now. It is a discussion that seems to be compounding because, again, many populations have now moved to talk about AI and forget about the problem of climate change. But more importantly, talking about AI in a way that it can address this particular impact. And yes, it does. Short term and there are long term climate change predictions that can be done AI, as discussed earlier. It can show so many things, including it can expand understanding and combating of climate change impacts. It can enhance environmental conservation efforts, and it can optimize resource management and energy consumption, which are big things. And we really, I really would want to see this one happening. However, in this particular deployment, I feel as a person, and this is what I discuss, that we are experiencing a myriad of ethical, societal, and environmental issues that are entangled together. And we are unable to deal with the problem while also addressing the problem, so that there is a lot of invisibilization of issues like what is happening about the computations that are power intensive in terms of training data with significant greenhouse gas effects and energy consumption, and also the invisibilization of issues like e-waste, but also the subordinating of such conversations as if they are not very important in terms of talking about the threatened landscapes, the host communities. I have talked so many times about the threatened communities in places where material that is going to power computing is going to be a mine. But then there's still to be a lot of muted conversation around that. Or the conversation, people try to mute them and keep trying to say things like, but the overall change is going to be positive and all that. Now, being down in the grassroots, like where I am now, I've been going to the villages in the last 1 week, and now I'm on my way to another village. Where I am, there are people that are not even talking about AI. They have not even experienced AI. They don't know even what it is. But yet, such population, climate change is real. It is happening. It is hurting them. We are having raising temperatures. We are having droughts that are impacting their productivity. We are having societal poverty because most of them have been depending on food production and food for sale, but then they cannot even be able to produce for their households, let alone food that they can be able to sell and all that. And so all these ones we are talking about some communities that are already threatened by climate change, but they don't have no idea about AI. So when we talk about the net outcome of AI, in our argument about how AI is going to change, that is now when we start introducing issues of power dynamics and talking about who is going to benefit from this particular conversation and who is going to lose from this particular conversation. And can we start talking about it with a lot of situatedness, thinking about a situated community, how is it going to be changed? by that particular technology that is being introduced? Or how do you even make sure that also the benefits are getting to these communities while they are also experiencing the risks, so that we can have that outcome in a way that it is discussed in an homogeneous way? Otherwise, this conversation needs to be viewed as situated and non-homogeneous. Now, how is the framing of the AI being done in climate, particularly in some of the global south countries like where I am? So there is a lot of positive framing. I've attended several conferences around here, and most of the time when you listen to in this particular conference, you find things like people talking about how AI can optimize everything, how AI can transform climate, how technology is going to be the next game changer in terms of climate crisis, in terms of food production, in terms of climate resilience. But there is very little emphasis on what we call responsible AI as relates to climate, which touches on ethics, equity, human rights, but also climate justice. In fact, in many of the conversations that I have attended, no one brings any descending argument or any critical argument in terms of saying this is what is happening and this is how AI is messing this space and negatively. Once you introduce it, you just mess the discussion because everyone wants AI to be framed as green. That is one. Number two, the critical perspectives about AI framing, most of them are focusing on techno-fix and techno-solution. And we're talking about tech as solutions to climate change. Tech as a fix of a problem of climate change and environmental sustainability. And this one has brought what we call a risk to greenwashing AI, because most of the time when we hear us talking about, we're talking about tech as green, but we are actually greenwashing it, because when you go deeper into research, it's showing that it's actually introducing, it's actually inducing the highest part of the highest level of greenhouse gas emission. In fact, it is projected that by 2030, the globe air will be spending 25% of the global electricity. And we know the globe is not producing green energy as it should. So we're going to be talking about fossil fuels will be powering AI. And fossil fuel translates to injecting greenhouse gas emission into the environment. So such framings are bringing different kinds of discussion while invisibilizing other discussions. Now, how might this framing propagate existing inequalities? I'm imagining that I am creating technology. I am propagating a techno-fix approach or techno-solution approach. And so I am simply propagating an unlimited growth of technology industry, while forgetting that there are a lot of issues that need to be entangled in this particular discussion. And as much as we also want tech to be grown, we also want some of these other issues to be addressed together with the tech issues. And I've given one of the biggest examples of such inequalities. When you look at how funding is being done today, I was reading about in the last 1 week, I found adverts that are calling for people to apply for grants for climate change technology. And the eligibility was very strict. You must be designing technology that is fixing environmental sustainability of climate change. When you apply for such, and I've asked several people, when you apply to bring a critical discussion about this, no one will fund such a critical discussion. No one will fund anyone researching about the negative impacts and how these ones can work together with these technologies so that they can be able to shape what we would call sustainable AI. So if everything that is being funded is being funded to techno-fix environments, then most likely the solutions that are being brought down here, they are just coming to cover an existing deeper problems of climate change, and basically it will not end up solving the problem. Technology industry will benefit because they will sell their technology. Existing communities or communities where these technologies are deployed will not get as much benefit, but they are going to suffer from impacts of climate change, but also other economic impacts that are come with artificial intelligence and the emerging technologies. So you find that the inequalities between who has power to do what, who has power to fund, and who has power to control how funding is done, how this research is going to go, and what are going to be the outcomes of research, induce a new kind of dimension where there are those who have power and they will continue being rich. They will continue gaining from the industry, while there are those who do not have power and they will continue suffering from the consequences because they do not have anywhere to voice. And this is actually an issue that I would call a policy issue, both global policy and both and national policy issues, because the society is going to find itself captured with a small population that runs the technology agenda, and they control the resources and they choose to fund tech itself. But then another population that is struggling with social and climate issues that needs these issues to be addressed. But then, because whoever owns money decides that these issues can only be addressed by creating new technology to solve all the problems that technology has created, then these inequalities will continue, and the inequality gap, in my opinion, will continue to grow deeper and deeper. I mean, larger and larger. Now, questions to address this include what are the power dynamics in the deployment, in the design, investment, and deployment of AI? How do they start shaping these existing inequalities? Who benefits from AI systems and who is adversely impacted? Are we even asking those questions? Do the local communities who do not understand AI, are they meaningfully involved to start talking about those discussions? Because when I am sold technology and told that it is going to solve a problem in my farm as an agricultural, as a farmer, am I also told the other side of it, how it may impact climate change, so that I can bring out my two-penny piece of advice in terms of how technology needs to enter my farm in a way that, while it is going to bring me benefits, it's also going to protect the environment, which I will need in the future for my farm. Because again, I see AI like the way politicians behave. You're selling this technology to solve a problem now, but you're introducing a new problem to another, to a population so that they may need you in the future. But are we going anywhere when it comes to climate change? So then at the end, who is going to ensure that everyone is part of this particular discussion, or they can retain control in terms of this particular discussion? Yeah, so the power dynamics in AI deployment come in different shapes and sizes. There's a global power influence, like we have how do tech companies and developed nations influence AI and deployment. Now, I have found this very interesting, and I think it's always, I always say that I'm lucky to be sitting in the global south, because from the global south is when you can feel where the shoe fits. I've been trying to think in terms of deployment of the AI in the global south and thinking about the climate change impact and all that. But then again, when you look at countries that are investing in artificial intelligence and where most of their companies are based, they are very much busy working on ethical issues in their space and all that. But when you come to the global south, you come and find the ethics of AI is a very silent issue. And actually, no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to fund it. And part of the bilateral discussions that are being done between countries is that if a country, the global north, at least has power, it negotiates for its technology to come in the global south through either sanctions or through giving donor money or development money and all that. But then still the development money is coming to support those companies to have unlimited technology growth. And this is building what we call technology dependency, data sovereignty, and it is messing up with issues of data sovereignty. I imagine a company sitting in Kenya, where I am, and the company comes and develops a technology in Kenya that will be used in the government decision making. Most companies that are given contracts through negotiation of the global powers are from the global north. They come, they are given a contract. They shape the digital systems in the government system. They harness public data. And after harnessing public data, they develop their technologies. They benefit from it. They come back to sell the same technology to the company, to the countries that they are in. And we become perennially dependent on technologies that are being developed from the global north. And you can hear whenever negotiations are being done, we are going to do this because of this. And what you are hearing, like if you've been watching news lately, what you're hearing in Kenya, there is a lot of demonstrations that are going on, people picketing and saying that they not only are pushing government to be accountable, but they are also pushing bilateral organizations like the World and IMF to be accountable to the people of Africa. Because there is a lot of inequality that is being propagated by such entities and through economic sanctions and through all this particular control of who owns the resources, and actually driving how development should be viewed in this particular spaces. But then also there is local versus global benefits. Who benefits from AI technologies and who might be marginalized? And those are discussions that are ongoing, this vision of our resources and how it affects local communities. Still, you find within this particular space, there are people who are running the agenda, or there are companies that are running the agenda. People who are controlling data seem to be the ones who have the power, who are running the agenda, including they are the ones that are holding the resources and all that. But then the question of community involvement has been one of the biggest challenges, because again, when you go to the communities, you realize there are communities that actually are seeking in their farms or in their vicinities. AI has been deployed every day. When people come there every day to them, they come to collect data. And that personal data, farm data, community data, health data is being collected every day from individuals, from hospitals, from local hospitals and all that, and from different spaces. But then they don't even know why the data is being collected. They don't know where the data goes. They don't know how it's being used. Actually, some of them have been impacted negatively by technology that have been reintroduced to them and all that. And those are some of the dynamics now that I'm grappling with, and we are grappling with as AI ethical experts in these particular spaces and all that. So, what are the ethical considerations of AI in climate? And what are the ethical drawbacks? How can we start thinking about AI in climate in a way that we can all be part of this particular conversation, and the agenda is not controlled from a certain center or from a few individuals? Am I the only one, or everyone is struggling with how climate or the planet is going to be if a few entities are going to be controlling what happens? So some of the issues that we are seeing are what I call ethical drawbacks and biases in applications. And there is the importance of equity consideration, because again, ethics is not about good and evil the way we want to see it, or where people come and say that these are the ethical practices. Because I've also been interacting a lot in LinkedIn, and I see like people want just to be given a quick answer to some problem. For example, if you want me, one of the things that, and I know maybe it has already come up as a question. Sometimes someone will say, so Angela, what do you think are the solutions? And then as a sociologist, I will tell you, I don't have the solutions. Why? Because climate change and AI are two big hyper objects that we need a serious reconsideration of how we start thinking about it and how we start thinking about good practices. Why am I saying that? Because these are large spaces that involve a lot of power negotiation. So they are political, very political. The two areas, AI and climate, they are very political. Number three, their impacts, or some of the impacts or some of the consequences are very invisible or invisibilized in a way that it is very easy to sell the shiny, good-looking artificial intelligence. Talk about the good things about it, but it is very easy to hide most of the negative impacts, some of which have been verified by some of them, by some of the AI experts and all that. If you've been looking closely, you will realize that most of the large tech are sucking ethics. They are actually reducing the employees that are addressing issues of ethics. Today I was reading an article where a certain, is it Microsoft or Google? I don't know which company between the two has removed the docket of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they are saying that such issues are not part of their business model. And so you realize now, because the tech has money, the large tech has everything, so they are the ones who decide whether it is what ethics it is. And if you bring an ethical person who wants to talk about it.
Excuse me. So Angela,
yes.
we're going to wrapping up soon. So please, if you have more slides, then finish.
I think this is the last slide again.
Okay. And then we have a two questions from the audience right now. So
exactly. So the ethical issues are issues that we may never be able to exhaust until all of us, or many of us in different places, are allowed to sit in the conversation and all that. Now, we also have the potential side effects and unintended consequences of climate change are there, but we do not know. And that is why ethical issues also need to be part of discussion, because most of the impacts we may not know. We already know some of them. So we need to start talking about, how do we start working on strategies that think of the past, present, and the future. And then now we go to ethical frameworks and guidelines. The existing ethical frameworks and guidelines for AI still touch very little about climate. They touch very little about social justice. They only elevate what we call economic growth and state growth. And so there is an importance of starting rethinking such ethical and start talking about what kind of plan. Thank you so much. I think I want to end it. So there's a question that is coming from Dr. Ufoma. What are the AI interventions? What are the AI interventions our global powers putting to assist developing countries, especially African countries, if they are available? Are they public? Are they public domain? And for all to see, you know, Dr. Ufoma, so far, I think we have the UN constituted AI panel for AI ethics that is now working on that. And I have not seen a report yet because it was constituted just a few months ago. So there's still a lot of discussions and spaces where you can do contribution. You can check with what you call, you can just Google UN AI level panel for AI ethics, and it is coming. It's trying to come up with interventions and principles that are going to guide AI governance in whatever. But they may not be targeting developing countries. Again, I don't have any clear picture about some interventions that are assisting developing countries.
Excuse me, and Angela, so we are out of time right now, and so let's save this other question for offline, and you can answer them offline. And
yes,
the other...
yeah. So
thank you.
Probably I can try to respond to those questions, and I will ask Ellen to send me the questions and probably the email, so or the space where I can share them and send the answers. I'm happy to respond to any questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And everyone, we're going to introduce the next speaker soon. Once Angela finish the sharing. Okay, thank you, Angela, and that's really very resourceful talk. I learned a lot from Ethics of AI from you, and that will count the next speaker. So let me share my screen. Okay, so the next speaker. So right now we're going to day 8, lecture 2, regulation of AI. The speaker is Dr. Philipp Hacker. And Dr. Philipp Hacker, he's a research chair of laws and ethics of digital society at European New School of Digital Study at the European University of Vienna and Frankfurt, and he focused on the regulation of digital technology, particularly artificial intelligence. And he collaborated with computer science and mathematician, and especially in the expandable AI and algorithm fairness. And also, Phillips also co-founded and co-lead the International Expert Consortium on Regulation, Economics, and Computer Science of AI. And recently, he has been appointed general editor for novel 11-volume AI and Society series, published from 2024 26 by Oxford University Press. Let's welcome Dr. Hacker on the stage.
That's great. Thanks so much for the warm introduction, and thank you for giving me the possibility to share some thoughts with you as I'm starting my slide deck on precisely the regulation of AI in the context of sustainability and climate change. So you have learned up until now a whole lot about the interaction of AI and climate change, I suppose. But I would like to stress that there is a regulatory dimension that has recently only come into focus. So computer scientists such as Lynn Koch, who is perhaps even among the viewers and who is one of the founders, let's say, of the climate and AI movement, and also of climate change, AI, and other fantastic scholars are driving this forward from a technical perspective, but they're also pretty much engaged in policy work. But it has only recently been the case that more mainstream politicians have looked at this issue, that climate affects the sustainability costs and implications, both positive and negative, of AI. So when I talk to politicians, which is something that I have recently started doing quite a lot, this is something that that raises eyebrows, and where people say, "Hey, this is really something we need to do something about." So I'm advising, for example, the German federal government and the European Parliament, now also the European Commission, and to a certain extent the United Nations on the regulation of AI, and also particularly I'm trying to push these matters of greater awareness toward the sustainability effects of AI from a regulatory perspective. So let me start by saying that I'll try to tackle this complex issue in 3 main steps, and I will try to finish within like 30 or perhaps 40 minutes, and then we can engage in a discussion. I'd very much like to hear from you what you think, where the main challenges are, what your comments are. Also, if you're interested, of course, you're welcome to write questions into the chat while I'm talking, and I'll try to address them as I speak. I may not be able to do that all the time, but maybe I have to collect some at the end, but please do that if you'd like. So we'll start off with some foundations on the regulatory structure surrounding AI before delving then more concretely into AI and climate and that intersection, both from just a little bit technical and sustainability studies, but then more concretely from a regulatory and legal perspective. And in the third step, I will showcase some specific challenges that we're facing in this realm, and where I think the whole project and the whole climate change AI movement might be heading when we look at it from a regulatory perspective. All right, so let's get started right away with some foundations. But before I do this, I just want to share with you some sources if you're interested in learning more about the regulatory perspective. You're welcome to check out some of these papers that I've written together with some co-authors, in addition to the fantastic resources that Climate Change AI is offering that you're certainly already aware of. They are open access. If you just look for my name under archive, then you would find all of them open access. And most of them are published in open access format anyways, also with the journals, wherever that was possible. So now let's start with some foundations. And when we talk about regulating AI, of course, we first need to define AI, because you cannot say there is a legal act that applies to something without really saying what that something is. And so let me ask you, you've already heard now in the summer school a lot on AI and climate change. So can you give me, perhaps in the chat, some definitions of AI that you think highlight some noteworthy criteria, some things that might be covered, that should be covered in a definition of AI? Feel free to weigh in. There's no right or wrong here, because effectively, even computer scientists cannot agree on a valid definition of AI. So as long as I don't see much on the chat, I'll just tell you what computer scientists often say is, if you look through the textbooks, It's usually a computer program that imitates human or rational thought or behavior. Okay, so it's basically something that tries to do something as well as humans do. But that's still a very fuzzy definition. And so the AI Act tries to come up with a more granular, more fine-grained definition. And that goes as follows. So, here's the first try. Very good. Artificial but effective way of solving climate issues. That can be an application of AI, but it's not really a definition of AI. It's a potential consequence of AI. Now, so AI is defined in the AI Act, and the AI Act is the new major regulation that we have at the European level for addressing major risks of AI. And it is defined there as a machine-based system that operates with varying degrees of autonomy and that may show adaptiveness after deployment, and that infers from the input it receives how to generate certain outputs that can influence physical or virtual environments. So if we look at this definition, basically meaning we have some system, machine-based, that takes an input and infers some output that has some consequence. Does that strike you as a valid definition of AI? So Falk, for example, says AI makes decisions based on data. That's a great piece of insight, particularly when we talk about machine learning. Now here you could say that you have the input that could be data, or you have a model that is being built, and that model does the inference. But let's do a check. Let's say you have an Excel sheet, and in that Excel sheet you have an auto sum function. So perhaps you're writing up a budget for your next vacation or for your next academic project, and you enter a couple of numbers. And then you want to do the sum, okay? And you want to do this automatically. You want Excel basically to calculate that sum. So is that auto sum function in Excel, is that an AI according to the definition of the AI Act? I think we all agree that this very likely should not be considered AI, right? It's just summarizing numbers. But if you look at the definition here, it's a machine-based system with varying degrees of autonomy. Varying degrees can mean anything. It has some input, the numbers, it has an output, and it has some, you might say it's some inference because it actually calculates the results. And it influences the physical or virtual environment. Well, it certainly does. You have a new number then, the sum. And also it might influence the physical world because now you can print out your document, or you can now submit your grant proposal, or you can actually go on vacation with a good budget. So it seems at first glance that even Excel auto-sum functions would qualify as AI. And that's kind of weird. So the first thing to remember about AI and definition of AI in the AI Act is it's very broad. The definition of AI generally is very fuzzy, but in the AI Act, it is intentionally broad. And you need to look actually at beyond the main articles to what is called the recitals. And the recitals, those are kind of introductory paragraphs that try to explain in a better way what the articles, the main act, wants to say. And here's what it says about inference, the process of inference. The AI Act here says that inference goes beyond basic data processing. So you might say, hey, an auto sum functionality that sums up a couple of numbers, it doesn't get much more basic than that, does it? So perhaps that's one way to exclude auto sum from AI. And it gets better. It also says that systems that are based on rules defined solely by natural persons for the automatic execution of operations do not count as AI. So basically, handcrafted rule-based systems, such as calculating, doing a calculation and not using ChatGPT to do it, but just using a calculator or the calculation function in Excel, that would be something that actually does not qualify as AI because it is such a rule-based system. So the upshot is that in the end, AI in the AI Act is defined as machine learning, very broadly understood. Okay, so it's a very wide-ranging definition. And whenever you deal with something that is akin to, let's say, stochastic optimization processes, It could be linear regression, logistic regression, fairly simple methods and algorithms for analyzing data. Even that falls under the definition of AI in the AI Act, but not if it's a rule-based system, okay? And so that gives us a handle to look now at what the AI Act actually does. And the AI Act is important because it is the first really comprehensive piece of regulation on AI in the world. China has some important parts of regulation, but more specific ones, for example, specifically on generative AI and specifically on other aspects of AI. And those were actually enacted before the AI Act. The US has the Biden executive order, and it has other state-level regulations about AI, but no federal large regulation like the EU does. And other states have followed suit. So Brazil is, for example, now pondering a regulation that is very similar to the AI, to the EU AI. But the EU AI is really the cornerstone at the moment of global AI regulations. Let me just quickly look at the question here. So the sustainability effects of the various definitions. So that's a good question. Basically, the broader the definition is, the more models you will capture. And if you have sustainability obligations in the AI Act, we will see that you have some, then more applications will be covered. So from a sustainability perspective, it's perhaps good to have a fairly broad definition of AI. For industry, it's often difficult to have a broad definition of AI because certain applications that industry would not qualify as AI, or at least not as advanced AI, also fall under the AI Act with all kinds of compliance issues that come after this that might be particularly difficult to tackle for SMEs. All right, good. So I hope I've addressed this question. And now let's move on to the next step. And so difference between AI and automation, that's a really important point. Automation just means something is being done without human interference in an automated way, basically usually rule-based. If I have my electronic toothbrush and I put it somewhere, it keeps brushing, and if I go there, I can brush my teeth without further human intervention. But there's certainly, hopefully, probably no AI in my toothbrush. So that's automated. But if something is autonomous, it means that it has some learning capacity. And that's what AI stands for, and particularly machine learning. All right, good. Then let's have a look at the structure of the AI Act. The AI Act specifically was designed not to regulate a whole technology, but rather to say we look at different use cases, because it will be very different. Using ChatGPT to write a birthday invitation, or using an image recognition tool to detect cancer. Obviously, this implies very different risk levels, right? So the legislators of the AI Act said, well, we need at least 4 different risk levels. And those are the following. We have prohibited AI systems. Prohibited AI, that's, for example, Chinese-style social scoring, which is something that the EU does not support. It is also the surveillance of persons in public spaces with the help of AI, remote biometric identification, unless it has to do with preventing or investigating certain very serious crimes. So those prohibited AI systems, they cannot be used at all in the EU. Then the main piece of the regulation is high-risk AI. So high risk, we will see, encompasses all kinds of different fields and use cases, for example, medical, or AI in education, or in employment. And then we have limited risk, and I'll tell you in a second what this is. For example, chatbots that don't do much more than chatting, they would fall under limited risk because they're not part of the high-risk sectors. They're also not prohibited, but you need to give some transparency. And we'll see what this means in just a minute. And then there is the minimal risk sector. And I used to say, an example of this would be if you just a spam filter that doesn't interact with humans. That's minimal risk because it's not in a high-risk sector. It doesn't interact with humans. That's limited risk. And so that's, if it's only internal, or a program that only, helps you organize emails, but without interacting directly with you, that's minimal risk. And they didn't used to be any rules on this. But now, actually, what the AI has, and yes, they were very controversial, and I can't really go into the details, but I can tell you that. Let me just finish that point on minimal risk. Minimal risk now has the obligation, or all AI systems actually in the EU now have the risk to ensure that the people who are dealing with the AI have sufficient AI literacy. And this means that basically all companies and all ministries, they need to provide education like this one, like the one you're doing now in this summer school, for all of the employees who are dealing with AI. So that's quite an ask. Let me just say that there was a huge debate about whether environmental effects of AI should be considered for the high risk classification. In the end, that did not go through, but we will see that something still remains for environmental protection in the high risk sector. Okay, it was very controversial to see which fields would be covered and which were not covered. I can't go into the details for the sake of time, but you will find some of this in my publications, for example, on regulating ChatGPT. And then there is another layer, and that layer is on general purpose AI systems. So that breaks with the architecture of looking at specific use cases, because all of a sudden, ChatGPT arrived. The train that the AI Act, basically, if you imagine the AI Act like a train, like a legislative train, it was already almost entering the terminal station. And then ChatGPT came like a wrecking ball from the side and totally derailed that train. Why that? Because generative AI systems like ChatGPT are general purpose, so you can use them, for example, to write a birthday card, or to write, a speech for your uncle for his birthday party when you don't want to think of one yourself. Those are all activities with minimal risk, except for perhaps your personal reputation, but no socially relevant risk. But on the other hand, you can also use it in all kinds of high-risk sectors. You can use it for medical diagnostics, maybe not in a very good way, but you could try to. You can use it for employment. You can use it in education, in all these high-risk sectors. So the generative AI, or foundation models, as they're often called, they don't belong to any specific sector. And hence, we now have a specific layer that deals only with those systems, because they don't really fit into any of these use cases. Let me, however, first show you what limited risk implies, because limited risk, that is the chatbots that we're dealing with. Okay, so if you think ChatGPT, Claude, any of those, that's typically limited risk. It could also be high risk if it's used in a high risk sector. But if it's not used in a high risk sector, but just for chatting or writing up whatever your next paper that you have to hand in, that's limited risk. So what does it imply? Oh, that's the old enumeration. I'm sorry. It's Article 50, actually. Article 50 now says that you need to disclose the fact that AI is being used when it interacts with humans. So it must be clear that there's no illusion created for people to think, oh, I'm actually interacting with a human person, with a human chat operator, when actually this is AI. It's fairly straightforward. But then also, it has to be disclosed when there are deepfakes. And that's actually a good point. And that's also Article 50, actually, Article 54. I'm sorry, I'll correct that for the final version of the slides that you'll get. So there has been a renumbering of the AI Act, and I just forgot to do this. So if you create a deepfake and you publish this in a professional capacity, then you need to say generated by AI. So if you imitate the voice by AI of Joe Biden trying to push out some message to voters, then you need to do that. You need to make sure that people understand that this is actually, for example, a joke, right? Or also applies to images. For text production, though, that's not the case. So for text production, you don't have to say, as a matter of the law, that the text was generated by AI. You only have to do this if it's a matter of public interest and there was no editorial review. So basically, if some federal ministry is stupid enough, the US State Department, to directly link ChatGPT to its Twitter account and put everything out online that ChatGPT says or does, well, that would be something where they would have to include a message that this is generated by AI, but not if you're just writing up something where you look at it before you publish it. And then I've brought along this beautiful image of a Swiss cow in front of the Matterhorn. It's a famous mountain in Switzerland in the Alps. Because what's now what will be required of providers of AI models is to make sure that they label AI-generated content, for example, with watermarks, so that people can actually see and understand that the content is generated by an AI. So I want you to look at this picture. And then I want you to tell me in the chat if you think that the left-hand or the right-hand side of the picture is labeled with watermarks. Look at it. Now you have 10 seconds, and then please put in the chat if you think left or right. So we got left hand, right hand, left, right. Okay, you got 2 more seconds to, okay, left, right. Yeah, it's fairly equal, actually, between both. So I can tell you, this is a bit of a tricky thing because, in fact, you cannot recognize it. Okay, so the point is that the left-hand side is watermarked, but with a system, Google Synth ID, that was developed such that you cannot see that it is watermarked immediately. Why this? So that you cannot remove the watermark so easily. Because otherwise you could say, I'm just taking Photoshop and then taking out the watermark. No, that doesn't work that way. Even if you use only part of that image, even if you alter the image, it's still the case that the watermark remains fairly well intact, and you need another recognition algorithm to run over it to actually detect whether those watermarked or not. So I'm sorry to have misled you there, but I only wanted to make the point that watermarks, they're not this kind of big AI stamp that you would think about, that, where people, you have this big red stamp and you think, oh, my grandmother can remove this with Photoshop. No, it's actually highly sophisticated stochastic algorithms that change the pixels in nuanced ways such that it cannot be reverse engineered very easily. Okay, so this is something to limit, of course, the spread of fake news that have been generated by AI, because you could actually then say, hey, look, this picture has been generated by AI. For example, if it shows, immigrants committing a crime that has been used by, right-wing populist parties, which already has happened, for example, in the European info space and also in the US, then you could say, well, this is actually not a real image. This is not authentic. And then let's quickly turn to high-risk AI systems. So what is a high-risk AI system? A high-risk AI system is anything that has to do with facial recognition or biometrics. Then the kind of parts that are relevant for industry, so education, employment, medical AI, creditworthiness check, or insurance, life insurance, health insurance. And then those are related to the public sector, so social benefits, migration, asylum, use of AI in the judiciary, and also if you design an AI system to influence elections specifically, that's also a high-risk AI system. Just to tell you real quick, what's not included, and those are the main core parts really of AI in the digital economy, that's anything relating to AI in e-commerce or search engines when it comes to ranking. So if I want to order my next pair of climbing shoes on Amazon or some other platform, that ranking in which the climbing shoes are shown, if I search something on Google, they use AI, they have been using AI forever to do that ranking. And that ranking is redone on a daily basis. And mind it, this has a huge climate impact because they're redoing the ranking all the time. And these types of applications are not covered by the AI Act. So that's a big loophole that we have there. It is covered by the Digital Markets Act, the DMA, but the problem is that in the Digital Markets Act, we don't have any, or not specifically, sustainability concerns that need to be adhered to. You could argue that there are some, but they're at least not specifically. Okay, just very quickly to give you an overview, what do you have to do as a provider of a high-risk AI system in the end? Well, if you look at the ML pipeline, machine learning pipeline, first you have to make sure that the training data is correct, representative, and minimized in terms of bias, so that the resulting AI product will not discriminate, say, against women or persons of color or so. Then you have Article 11 to 13, and that has some transparency and documentation rules. So that's important to see, because those are the very rules that we will rely on to then say, hey, maybe in this transparency and documentation, maybe we find something about the climate impacts. Then we also have a rule that says you need to have a human in the loop. So you can't have the AI do automated decisions all by itself. And you have some performance metrics, and the AI must be sufficiently accurate, robust, and it must have IT security. And then all of this must be encompassed in one big risk and quality management system. And again, we will return to this to see that this is an angle where we can find some sustainability provisions. Let me see what the question is here. Reference documents, you can just Google AI Act, and then you'll find it. That's pretty easy. All right. So then we go to the next slide, and I just want to show you very briefly what now the approach is for foundation models. Remember, we said there's high-risk AI systems, and then there's this layer, this distinct layer of foundation models or general purpose AI systems that's actually kind of the same. And those foundation models, sorry, I have the old numbering here too, it's Article 53 now, they have transparency and copyright rules. And those transparency and copyright rules, they are really important. Not so much the copyright rule, but again, the transparency rules, they hold some clues for sustainability. And then if you are a major provider of a major general purpose AI system, of a large foundation model, such as GPT-4, and actually the technical definition, if we have some techies around here, it's 10 to the power of 25 flops of floating operation points. So really big systems that needed a lot of compute for training. GPT-4, Claude 3, potentially Gemini, maybe some Chinese models. Then it is labeled as a foundation model or general purpose AI model with systemic risks. And again, you have to do risk management for that model. And again, we'll see that this is important for sustainability. All right, and then some questions remain, such as, fine-tuning. Does that mean when I fine-tune a foundation model, does that make me a provider of the foundation model? Lots of debate around this. I'm happy to say more about this in the discussion. But now let me focus perhaps a little bit more in the remaining minutes on AI and climate specifically. I'll go through the statistics rather quickly because you have seen some of this, certainly, and there will be more lectures on this. But I just want to say that this is really the new frontier in AI policy, the question of what's the connection between advanced AI systems and climate change or sustainability more broadly. And this is important because we have very significant GHG effects, greenhouse gas emissions effects of information and communication technology, ICT, and of AI. Because you might say, hey, these few AI models, I mean, what effect are they going to have? We're all the time talking about air travel. For example, you're not supposed to travel that much because that's bad for the environment. And most everybody now knows this. Well, it turns out, if you look at the actual emissions by ICT, that's information communication technology, they contribute about 1.8 to 3.9% to global greenhouse gas emissions, and that was in 2021, and it has risen steeply, so I suggest it's much higher now. Compare that with air travel. Global air travel actually was at 2.5%, estimated 2.5% by that time. So that's actually the same category, potentially even more. And if you look at AI, compute, GHG costs, so that the costs of training and then running AI model, that's actually skyrocketing. There are papers that predict that the GHG emissions by 2027 of AI alone will rival those of countries such as the Netherlands or Argentina. And actually, it's not only the training, and that is one really important point. It's not only the training, because often it's being said, AI is being trained and this consumes a lot of energy. It's also what's called inference, so the application of the AI in a concrete scenario. Next time you want to generate an image for fun with a big image generator, think twice, because Sasha Lucioni, who's also very much involved in the climate change AI movement, and colleagues have shown that one image consumes as much energy as fully charging your smartphone once. And that's just one image. So imagine 100 million users doing images for fun. That's a whole lot of smartphones that have to be charged there for these images. So that's massive. The amount of emissions or of energy that goes into inference is just absolutely massive. It dwarfs the amount that's necessary for training fairly quickly. And then let's also remember that it's not only AI itself that is driving GHG emissions. It's also potential AI applications, because you can use them to combat climate change, to detect desertification, to optimize grids, to optimize the cooling of data centers. But they are also used, for example, for exploring new oil and gas facilities, for making this more efficient, and for basically then increasing incentives to baby drill, as the new policy might well be in the US also from November this year on. So we can see that this has all kinds of ripple down effects that are not only stemming from AI itself, but also from the ways in which AI is used. And then there's some potential mitigation, of course. So AI, as we said, can be used to mitigate and adapt to climate change. But the largest part of energy consumption, and water consumption for that matter, comes from generative AI, because they're extremely inefficient at the moment to train and deploy. But those Gen AI models specifically have very limited potential, in my view, to actually mitigate climate change. So the climate change mitigation often comes from image detection and other more traditional models. But generative AI, which is often used for playing around and just chatting, that is not something that is having a big impact on climate change mitigation at the moment. So here we have a clear disconnect and a mismatch. And I would just want to point you to the fact that on day 10, Lynn will tell you more about this in her session on the GHG impact assessment of AI. That's in July 22 coming up. And you should be looking forward to this with more granular information on this. So here's a good question on the chat. Is there a reason AI should be specifically regulated for energy use compared to other technologies? Yes and no. There is theoretically not a good reason for doing this, other than saying that AI is picking up rapidly and emissions are just soaring to an extent that these more traditional technologies are not. But so that's a matter of degree. There is, however, something to be said for starting with AI, because there is now a momentum for a policy discourse and a window of opportunity for regulating AI that's not there for other technologies in the same way. So whenever you talk about the regulation of emerging technologies, that's really about the regulation of AI at the moment. And that's why these acts are being enacted and are being revised. And that means that policymakers are listening to this. So it's a merely strategic move to start with AI. But then you would have to devise a blueprint that can be mapped onto other technologies as well. And in fact, look at blockchain, look at the metaverse. All of these are super high emission technologies. And of course, what holds for AI also holds for them, and the kind of strategies, the regulatory strategies that we're advancing for AI, mutatis mutandis, also apply to these other technologies. So it's just a first step, but it's a very good question. So let's move on just a little bit to look at why at the moment, or in how far, sustainable AI is kind of a blind spot in AI regulation so far. I want to say that the tide is turning just a little bit, but it hasn't turned fast enough for the regulations that we have at the moment. Why this? Now, there is a whole body of law in most countries, in the US, in the EU, and in many other countries, that's called environmental law. And if we talk about the climate and environmental impact of AI, we might want to start looking there, not in specific AI regulation, but maybe in environmental law. Maybe that says something about how you can and cannot use AI in this context. And we know about the emissions that basically stem from the energy demand of AI. And we know also from other studies about the extreme water consumption that AI has. Basically, does anybody have an idea? Why does AI need so much water? What do you need it for? Cooling. Yeah, that's right. Cooling data centers. So you're cooling data centers. And that cooling exercise means that a lot of this actually evaporates. So it's not the case that it just goes in, goes out, and you can reuse it. You have to retreat it if it comes out, and a lot of it actually evaporates. So there is quite a bit of water loss, and water is increasingly scarce, and these data centers are often built in deserts, such as in Arizona, and there's not too much water around there. So guess what's happening? Basically, Las Vegas is competing with Google and other major players for water for either the city or the data centers. That's not a good position to be in. And so you could say, well, there is some regulation about this. And there's energy consumption too within, that's correct. There's energy consumption too in applications, and many of them also need water, also for cooling, but also for other things. So there are some frameworks like the emissions trading systems that address emissions, or usually carbon emissions. And in the EU, we have the WFD, that's the Water Framework Directive. Now, the problem is that the Water Framework Directive, you could tweak it in certain ways to say data centers that are built in the EU, they are covered by the Water Framework Directive. And you could perhaps say that that when designing the data centers, the supervisory authority can have a look at these data centers and say, well, you're consuming too much water, you need to redesign your data center. That would be one way to actually think about this, and I think this is a potential way forward. We've seen this, for example, with factories that are being built, the Tesla gigafactories, for example, where similar issues have come up with water use and where the regulators have then responded. But one key concern is that AI is not covered by emissions trading, because these emissions trading, thanks for the, I'll look at that question in just a second. There is emissions trading, and AI is not covered by this traditional emissions trading because it focuses on these traditional high emission sectors such as steel, transport, aviation, maritime transport, and so on. So there's a real gap in AI regulation, you could say. And because AI basically came into public perception after these frameworks were implemented. Now, so there's, as Amanda says, so there's, yeah, this is a good question. So I'll maybe take this up a little bit later when I talk about the policy making efforts. But it's true that on member state levels, there are frameworks that look at the hardware, particularly of the data centers. And there's even a European initiative, the renewable energy directives that try to mandate that certain amounts of the energy that are consumed by data centers need to be renewable. So those are steps in the right direction, I think. But one way actually to help with this discourse is by creating multipliers, multiplying entities or persons like Climate Change AI and all of you are on the call to actually look at this and tell people about the importance of it. Now, what does the EU AI Act then say? Because you could say, well, isn't this something that's addressed in the AI Act? And to a certain extent it is. But let's first say and remember that the AI Act is not something that's limited to the EU. Actually, it applies to everyone that is providing or developing AI systems, as long as these AI systems are also offered in the EU, as long as you can access them from the EU, for example. So even if you're building an AI model in Beijing or in Washington, D.C., or in Honolulu, or somewhere in South Africa, it doesn't matter. You will be covered by the AI if you want to capture the EU market. And what does the AI then say? Well, first, it has these transparency requirements that we talked about. So providers of foundation models, of these general purpose AI models, they actually have to disclose the energy consumption of the models, but for development only. So basically for the training process. And if they don't know what the energy consumption is, and if it can't really find out, then they can use estimates based on the computational resources. So that's good. That's a good step in the right direction, because at least if we have those data, researchers and others, they can look at it, and market participants, and try to create incentives, base reports, and analysis on these figures. And then the providers of high-risk AI systems, they need to disclose at least the compute that they used for the development of the system. They don't need to disclose the energy consumption, but there is a clear correlation, and usually can try to calculate the energy consumption from the compute that was being used. So at least you can approximate it. And so we have made some headway toward being more transparent, toward having more information about these about the energy and compute resources used by at least these models. What's missing, you might say? Well, there's a number of things that are missing. So first of all, open source foundation models, they are exempted from these transparency requirements. And the idea is that open source models, they're open, so everybody can look at them. And you could, a lot of information is already available. Unfortunately, that specific type of information, namely the compute information, does not need to be provided for these models to count as open source. So that's a real gap. Then you have the large number of non-high-risk AI systems. Yeah? If you think about, systems that are used just in any other sector, rather than those that are high risk, somewhere in industry, for example, there's huge amount of applications that are not considered high risk, and where therefore, as long as it's not a foundation model, the providers do not need to tell us anything about the compute or energy requirements. And then there's the whole part of inference that's missing, and that's really bad as well. We said that it's not only the training and development, but that's what the AI is focusing on, but rather the inference, and also the applications, the indirect effects. Think again of the oil and gas production or oil and gas facilitation exploration. All of this does not need to be reported. So it's a very incomplete reporting scheme, but it's still, better than nothing. However, there is something that's really interesting. Does anybody recognize this funny little animal on the right-hand side? What could that be? Yeah, right. It's a Trojan horse. And a Trojan horse, of course, contains something that you didn't see entering. Now, I suggest that environmental protection is actually entering the AI Act via the Trojan horse of the risk assessment framework. How this? So providers of these very large foundation models and the providers of high-risk models need to assess and mitigate risks to fundamental rights. And we've seen this in the obligations, right? We always have this risk management obligation. What does it mean? Basically, they have to look at all kinds of things that could go wrong with respect to fundamental rights, such as, non-discrimination or intransparency, other fundamental rights aspects to health, safety. All of this they have to map out, and they have to create mitigation strategies. Now, you could say, well, fundamental rights, but environmental protection is not a fundamental right. Unfortunately, it is not. So particularly in the EU, it is not a fundamental right. It's not where the fundamental rights are in the Charter of the Fundamental Rights. It is mentioned there, but merely as a principle, not a fundamental right. But here comes the Trojan horse. The EU AI Act itself says that these risks need to be assessed and mitigated with respect to fundamental rights, such as democracy and environmental protection. So the AI Act itself mislabels environmental protection as a fundamental right. But at the same time, it makes it pretty clear that environmental protection must be part of these impact assessments and impact mitigations. And this is what's really important, but at the same time, it's not very well known at the moment, because traditionally, environmental protection is not part of the fundamental rights. And hence, it's really important to raise awareness of the fact that we have this Trojan horse, and I've tried to raise awareness of this with the AI office, the new supervisory structure that we have at the EU level, to say that this is actually something that should be included in all of the risk assessments, but also, importantly, in the guidelines and the codes of practice that the AI office is now generating for providers. So we can see that actually, by this misrepresentation of fundamental environmental protection as fundamental rights, we can include environmental protection under what might be termed a sustainability or a climate change impact assessment for AI. And that means that every time Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, all the large providers release a new model, before that, they need to do an impact assessment. They need to try to mitigate those risks by using more efficient technologies, by actually just reducing the number of parameters that they use, many different strategies, and they have to make sure that they document how they were running these mitigation strategies. Let me just quickly look at the. All right, yeah, yeah. Thank you, Amanda. It's under the Council of Europe, but in the EU, it's fairly clear. We have the Charter of Fundamental Rights, and it's plainly clear that that this does not qualify. So for data centers, yes, that's another thing. Data centers, usually when they're built as part of the construction permit, you have to do some kind of environmental impact assessment. And I don't think you have to do a social impact assessment, but you usually have to do an environmental impact assessment. And so there, it could be part of it. But the problem is that the data centers often do not disentangle AI from non-AI. And often that also depends on where the data centers are built. So we'll see, there's been a recent study that shows that you have data centers basically all across the globe, and many of them are now increasingly being built in countries where you don't have so much, environmental conscience, you don't have much in terms of environmental law regulation, you don't have much of an emissions trading system. So what I can suggest is, we might want to think about an emissions trading system for AI. Why this? Well, because as we've seen, the emissions are already comparable to aviation, but aviation is part of the ETS and AI is not. There's a slight difference in that aviation, of course, burns fuel and hence contributes actively and directly to emissions, to greenhouse gas emissions, whilst AI mostly contributes via the energy that is used. And that energy might already be part of an emissions trading system. But that's very incomplete, actually, this logic, because as I said, these new studies, they show that actually often data centers are built in parts of the world where we don't have a functioning emissions trading system for carbon-intensive energy creation. And so I think there's something to be said about thinking broadly about GHG and energy budgets for perhaps also different kinds of AI applications. You could say that, for example, if you use AI for medical purposes, you have a much higher energy budget than if you use it for, say, fine-tuning the latest war games that you want to use for entertainment purposes. And so in the end, I think what we need is really a system to set these workable financial incentives, because we see at the moment that the market is not regulating this by itself. What counts is only being number one of the leaderboard And companies are throwing incredible amounts of resources at being number one of the AI leaderboard, irrespective of whatever the costs are for the environment and for the climate. Let me just double check on the question. Follow up on the do you think data centers could fall on supply chain? Nope, they don't. They don't fall under the obligations for supply chain. Supply chain, there are some rules on the AI supply chain, but it doesn't go as far as data centers. It doesn't even capture if you just collect the data and stuff. So the supply chain rules, that's really starting with a model that has been constructed and put onto the market, and then if you fine-tune the model, if you use it for different purposes, that's what it does. But data centers are unfortunately not covered. We have infrastructure regulation, and we have, as I said, these building permits. We have the Water Framework Directive, but it's not in the IA. Thank you, though. And so basically, what I think is important, here we come back to and that's then my last slide, it would come back to what Amanda said, how can we raise awareness? How can we try to convince regulators that this is something worthy of talking about? So I think it really only works by showing them the statistics that make the case that this is actually a problem that is equal to or even larger than air travel, which is what many people associate with, what can I do to mitigate climate change? And making sure that people understand that this is rising in an extreme way. And so I think here's some concrete challenges, and we need to address them as researchers, because if we don't, then politicians will say, and that was one of the problems in the IAC negotiations, and I was involved in this a little bit, that as long as we don't standardize the climate impact reporting, people will say, but companies cannot even do anything about it. They don't even know what measures to use. So this is something that we shouldn't force companies to do, as long as we don't have a clear set of metrics that they should be using. So this kind of research towards standardization, I think, is hugely important. Then we also need clearer rules on AI training. And that goes precisely to what was asked before, well, the data centers are part of the framework. They're not, but those rules should cover, for example, questions on how and when data centers can source their energy. How that energy mix should be constructed, how it could be staggered, for example, starting with, let's say, 50% renewables and then going up, and making sure that the providers of data centers do not take this renewable energy from existing renewable energy, but that they are actually under an obligation to create that very energy that they're using in a renewable way. Because otherwise what's happening is that Google is now the biggest utility company in the US because they're buying up all of the renewable energy, and other big companies as well, Meta and Microsoft, because they want to meet their carbon zero goals, which is a laudable goal, but it means that there's just literally no renewable energy left for any other and the smaller players. So what we need is an obligation for these big players to actually actively contribute to having more renewable energy out there. And then I think we should, as I said, think about defining carbon and energy budgets for different types of applications based on their social utility. This is going to be challenging, but I think it is important to make that case. Now, I'm just looking at the what incentives for governments and businesses could be leveraged. Well, I think for governments, it's straightforward that this is part of the Green New Deal, and for any government that somehow prioritizes climate action, and we will see the incoming, U.S. administration. It comes from the Republican Party. We've just seen at the convention that this will very likely not be the case, but there might still be, some chance for negotiations here. But I'm a little bit pessimistic. But at the same time, at least the EU government was fairly straightforward on this. China is doing a lot and is actually building a lot of solar energy. And to tell them that this actually goes into the same direction, I think that's helpful. And at the same time, for businesses, of course, there are huge incentives to cut down the energy costs. But these incentives, because it's costing a lot, like in terms of monetary costs, but these incentives are not yet great enough to counteract the incentives to build the next better high-performing model, to build that GPT-5 that is then going to clear the market and create a winner-takes-all position. And that's why we need regulation, because we have a real case of market failure here in terms of caring for climate effects on the environment. So those are my thoughts on this. There is an international dimension to it, which is addressed in the Global Digital Compact at the United Nations level. And I've just recently been chatting with and had a panel with Anna Christmann, who is the German envoy to the United Nations High-Level Advisory Board. And she's from the Green Party, and she very much takes these concerns seriously. And I talk about sustainable AI regulation actually when I was on that panel, and we will see what comes out of this. There's certainly a great amount of interest in it, but the kind of measures that the UN can actually engage in and commit to in a binding way are, of course, very limited. So there is some reason for hope, but there is also some concern that this will not be, as early and as soon as possible. So I'm done with this and just want to conclude that, oh, by the way, I founded this international expert consortium. If you're interested in it, it's called RexAI, and we have upcoming talk, for example, on conference at the Brookings Institution, partially also on sustainable AI. So the conclusion is the future will be exciting, but it might be more or less exciting depending on how much we can actually think together the dual transitions of the digital and AI transition and the climate transition. So thanks so much for listening, and I'm very much looking forward to any questions that you may have. I've tried to answer some of the questions along the way, which is why I've gone a little longer than I thought, but please feel free to raise any further questions that might be there.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hacker. If there's no further questions, so I've just posted the feedback form on the chat. So yeah, with my Helen chance, and then here I post again about the feedback form. So every participant, if you have time, and feel free to give us some feedback for today's lecture for both of these two. And Dr. Hacker, thank you again for really informative and useful results about laws and then regulations and environmental sustainability. And that's I learned a lot as a environmental scientist and also computer scientist too. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much for including me. And this was a great summer school. I really wish you best of luck for the coming days. Fantastic initiative. Keep up the spirit. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And everyone have a good day.